You're listening to Permission To, the podcast where we dive into the science and soul of owning your worthiness as a perfectly imperfect human being. I'm your host, Sam Dew, psychotherapist, positive psychology coach, mama to a beautiful 5-year-old Amelie, and passionate advocate for living an inspired life. My aim is to show you that you have full permission to own your worthiness so that you can embrace your true nature and begin walking boldly toward your dreams. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Permission To. I've had a little bit of a break because we've been away on our baby moon, which I feel so grateful that I was able to do. And I also took off a couple of weeks with school holidays. So yes, but we're back today, and we've got a really special episode today, Permission to Grieve. And I just wanted to give you all a little bit of a heads up that in this episode, I will be speaking about grief more broadly, as well as my experiences with miscarriage and pregnancy loss, and also grieving over the festive season, whilst also navigating life as a CEO of my business. So if either of these things are not subjects that you would like to listen to right now, then please check out my previous episodes, and I can't wait to see you next week for more. For those of you who think that this episode might be supportive for you, let's dive in. So just to start with, I wanted to be really clear that as I'm sharing my experience and my knowledge, I'm more so drawing on my qualifications and expertise as a therapist here rather than as a coach for this episode. Although obviously I kind of draw on both skills at certain times. I just wanted to be clear about that. So some of you may know this already. I think most of my beautiful clients do, but maybe my general audience and on social media, and those of you listening to this episode may not know that I had a miscarriage at the end of last year. I was 10 weeks pregnant, so I was almost through that, that kind of 12-week window where they say you're more vulnerable to a miscarriage. And honestly, it really shocked me, I guess, to be 10 weeks pregnant, and then to, start bleeding. I guess is also going to be quite a graphic episode, I'm going to share my experience. So, it was a bit of an interesting pregnancy, I guess. I didn't have as much morning sickness, and I felt reasonably well. And keeping in mind, this was 2020, so it was a year that COVID came and hit everyone in different ways, but everyone pretty hard. And even though I was in Perth and we had a much shorter lockdown than some of the other places in the world, it had been a pretty tough year. It was emotionally, I found 2020 really hard as a therapist and a coach, but particularly as a therapist, because there was about 2 months where my daughter wasn't at school, we were in lockdown, and I just felt really emotionally drained, and like I didn't really want to do my job in some ways, but also I felt like a deep sense of responsibility as a therapist during that time that, I needed to continue to support my clients because it was, really challenging for them as well. So and I'm so grateful that I get to support clients in a therapy way and in a coaching way and my online group. So it was a really interesting year. Like I'd had the most amazing year in my business. I launched the Happy Biz Mama project for the first time. I launched Permission Granted for the first time. My coaching started to take off. And I was still working in my counseling practice as well. So it was a really good year for my business, but it was a very hard year personally. And I think that losing our baby at 10 weeks was just like the final straw. It felt like, I was just sliding into the end of the year, and there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And then I just felt really, at first I felt very shocked, obviously, because 10 weeks is quite far along, and I felt really sad. But also it was quite physically challenging. I think this probably doesn't get spoken enough about with miscarriage, but for me, being 10 weeks along, there was, my body had to go through a lot to actually, I had a natural miscarriage. So, I didn't need to have any surgery or anything like that. But my hormones were all over the place. I had horrendous headaches for, I'd say, a month or so afterwards. And I guess the biggest thing was just the grief and the sadness. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about grief after miscarriage, because I think I was so sad and I was so flat that probably if I'd been to see a psychologist, and they hadn't looked at the context, it would have looked like depression, like really having a lot of trouble getting out of bed, having a lot of trouble picking my daughter up from school, just not feeling motivated at all. And I found everything so triggering. Like, I'd drive to Pilates and then I'd sit in the car park and I'd be like, no, I can't go. Like I was just in tears. And I just really, I guess, in a nutshell, lost my mojo. And what I mean by that is I lost like my energy, my drive, all the things that bring me joy. I think that's the thing about grief as well. It often has a ripple effect on our lives because, for example, I had just launched another round of the Happy Biz Mama project, and I think we were only in week 2 when I lost the baby. So I was so grateful. The women in that program, I always attract very big-hearted, understanding, compassionate women. And so they were really, beautiful around me taking a couple of weeks off to just process the loss and to heal. But it definitely, I guess, impacted my experience of holding space for women that time round. In some ways, actually, I'm so grateful for those women because holding space for them was actually part of what helped me get through the experience. I feel like holding space for others is always really energizing and gets me reconnected back to my power. But I also didn't feel 100% like the best version of me, which is always how I want to show up as a coach. And then, so I guess it affected the final round of the Happy Biz Mama project because I don't run that anymore. But also then what was really tricky was, navigating Christmas, like December, because the miscarriage happened around middle of November, if I remember correctly. And, navigating December, which is such a joyful time when you're still grieving, is really hard. I found like, I'm in my daughter's school concert, like it's such a happy time of the year, and it was really special, but like it was just twinged with like a seed of sadness, and everything about Christmas that year just felt different for me. And then also because my most favorite thing that I do in my business is Permission Granted, my 10-month year-long experience. Because it's a year-long experience, I only really get to launch it once or, maybe twice, but I essentially have to have finished the launch by January. And there I was thinking, I'm someone who really believes in focusing on my energy. I'm someone who believes in, showing up really in an inspiring and vibrant way in my business, especially when you're launching something. But I just had no mojo, and I was like, oh, what's going to happen with Permission Granted in 2021? I just don't feel like enough joy, enough energy, enough motivation to really make this program happen. But I also absolutely love this program and want it to keep going. And if I don't show up for my launch, then, it won't get to be a 10-month experience. So I was sitting with that as a business owner. And that was really, really challenging to navigate. I'd already booked in for a day business retreat with Tracy Spencer before I'd lost Bub. And so I think that that was really, I remember driving there and thinking, oh, what am I doing? Like I wouldn't have booked this if I'd known how I was feeling. But it was actually so energizing to be around other women in business and in Tracy's amazing, her energy. So that really helped me. But then I think, so this is where I'm going to talk to you. I guess I'm going to split this episode up into two things. One is how we can support ourselves through grief, and two, how we can navigate being a CEO of our business from a place of compassion and hope. And I'm really just going to riff this episode and share what's from my heart and my story, rather than having lots of structure. So if that's not your style, that's okay. But that's how I'm doing it today, because it didn't feel right to kind of prepare this episode too much, I have to be honest. So look, I'm going to start first with navigating grief, because I guess first and foremost, if you're a business owner, you're a human being first, right? And you have to attend to your human needs and your energy and your emotions first before you can attend to your business in some ways. That's what I believe anyway. And so I often get asked as a therapist, I get asked this more as a therapist than as a coach, but it does come up sometimes in coaching calls too. Like, what tools do you use to grieve? Like, how can I essentially fix this? Or how, and what I say about grief is that the only way to grieve is through it. We can't skip it. So I always think about, it's like trying to, get to the other side of the park by going around it instead of walking straight through it. You need to go through it. You can't skip it. And so the number one thing that helped me was just allowing myself to really feel all my feelings, to express them. Lots of really beautiful chats and text messages with friends. Nick and I did quite a few walks on the beach. Actually, it was like a really hard time in our relationship, but it also made us really close. I guess that's kind of a cliche, but I find some stressful things in relationships can kind of, you react in a way as a couple where you feel further apart, and you're kind of you can be quite divided. That's just my experience. But there are other things in relationships that can bring you closer together. And for whatever reason, this, our loss kind of really did bring us closer together. So that's the big thing to know about grief. It's not something that we can, and also this is what, most therapists would agree with me around this, that it's not something that we can teach tools to make it go away, because it's not like depression or anxiety or something like that. It's you responding to a loss, and so you need to be able to process that. And so, lots of things that I did, like I went back and saw my old psychotherapist who I hadn't seen in quite a while. I also kept working with my mindset coach, and I had 2 healing sessions. I'll share the links below with the beautiful healers. Alira Potter, I had an amazing session with Alira. And I also had a session with Sammy. So I'll share their links below. But so I think it's really like when you're grieving, for me, I felt like this really vulnerable sponge that just needed lots of TLC, needed to be around the right people, and needed to be around people that were supportive and understanding. And I'm so grateful, well, obviously it's sad that miscarriage is so common for women, but I'm also really grateful for all the women in my life who shared their experiences of miscarriage with me, because I think if you've never been through a miscarriage before, you sometimes don't know what to expect. So that's the main thing, accepting your emotions, getting support, allowing the emotions to move through you, and knowing that grief isn't something that we ever get rid of. We just learn to carry it. And what tends to happen is that our life gets bigger and the grief gets smaller. And that's definitely like my experience. Like, I still feel sad about the loss that we had last year. But even being pregnant this year, that it's been tinged with some sadness at times, because I guess while I was pregnant, I was thinking, well, I would be holding a newborn baby right now if I hadn't lost our bub. So yeah, I think, recognizing that grief isn't something that we can skip, and that we just learn to live around it is really, really important. And also what's interesting is when we're grieving a miscarriage, we are grieving for what could have been. It's the unknown. So it's like we've lost this this potential or this future or this hope. And I think that's really different to losing a person in your life that you've already experienced in the living in the world with you for however long. It's just a different type of grief, and it's that unknown. Yeah, and the main other thing is accepting and asking for support and creating space to grieve. Like I said, I took 2 weeks off fully from my business. Like I cancelled all my clients. I cancelled Happy Biz Mum. Put it on hold for 2 weeks. And that felt really important for me. I know other women who say that they have worked through a miscarriage. They have, just kept going, or they've actually found it supportive to keep working. So everyone's different. But for me, I think because my job is also very emotional, I really needed that space. And in terms of navigating being a CEO of your business, I think this is really challenging, right? Because in social media, I feel, and as an online business owner, I feel like it's okay to admit when you're anxious or you're being challenged by procrastination. Even trauma is becoming a lot more acceptable to talk about. But I don't know if grief and sadness and depression and low motivation, I think there's like a real stigma around business owners talking about those things still, because it's like, well, if you're sad, then how are you going to support me? Or if you're not motivated, how are you going to support me? So I think that it's important to recognize that if you are, in business and you're experiencing some kind of grief or you lost your mojo, that's how I felt after, as well as grieving. I really lost my energy and my drive. But I didn't really feel like I wanted to share it on social media at that time, and I was quite private about it. But what I would say is that for me, navigating being the CEO of my business, but also the human being who has just had a loss, was really important. And that meant coming at my loss from a place of compassion and hope. And so that was like, just talking really kindly, really lovingly, really gently to myself about how I was feeling. The biggest thing is if you have team members, make sure you lean on your team and let them support you. Marie, my beautiful VA, sent me like the most lovely bunch of flowers, and she just handled everything for me. Like I just let her know what happened, and then she contacted all my clients. She rescheduled everything. She already kind of does that for me, but it just felt so nourishing to have her just totally step in so that I didn't need to do anything. So I think that's a really big thing. If you have got a team member in your business, make sure that you let them support you. And the other thing that I found was your purpose and your why will get you through in the end. This is something I'm so grateful for. As someone who, has always been like in a helping role, what I've found is that helping others has always helped me get through challenging times in my life. So obviously there's a bit of a happy ending to this story in that I did manage to get my mojo back over, and this I guess is where the hope comes through, because over summer, like December, January, I guess just having lots of time at the beach, having lots of time off, lots of time with my daughter. It was, I just started to feel more and more like myself. And so I did just plan to launch, even though I didn't have my mojo back when I started to plan to launch Permission Granted for 2021, I still went ahead with it in a way that was respectful to me. So knowing that as a business owner, I can always change my plans. I still got someone to help me with my Facebook ads. I still planned my launch, scheduled dates, kind of trusting that in the future I would feel up to launching, even though at that particular time I didn't. And that was really supportive for me. it might not work for everybody else, but for me, choosing some dates a little bit further along of when I was going to launch, planning, showing up for my community. Thinking about all the women that wanted to do Permission Granted again, because we had quite a few women who took the Permission Granted 2020 experience that wanted to do 2021 again. So, those women, if you're listening, you know who you are, and I'm so grateful for you. They almost inspired me to keep going as well when I felt like, this has been such a shit year. I just don't want to do anything in my business or in my life at the moment. It was really the women that I support and the joy that I get from supporting them that helped me to get through. So that's my story, that's my experience. That to come at your business from a place of compassion and hope when you are grieving, or if you are just navigating a really challenging time in life, trusting that you will move through it in your own time, but you need to allow yourself to feel it. And your purpose or your why will get you through. For me, it's literally the women that I support that keep me going, and making sure that you're open to receiving support. I think a lot of women find it really hard to receive support, and I've spoken to a lot of women who have been told, when they have a pregnancy loss, just get on with it. And actually, to be honest, this is really terrible, and this might be quite triggering as well. But when we saw an obstetrician that I'd never met before when we had our pregnancy loss, because I was meant to be going through a family birth centre program where the midwives don't meet you till 20 weeks. So I didn't actually really have anyone to take care of me during the miscarriage except for my GP, and she was really hard to get into. So she suggested a private OB. But this private OB said to me, "Oh, you're too old to grieve. You just have to pretend this is your period." Which honestly, I'm so disgusted that she said that to me. And I've actually been intending to make a complaint to APRA about it, because I actually think it's a very inappropriate and quite dangerous thing to say to a woman who's grieving. Because also as a counsellor, I have supported women after miscarriage who have ended up with anxiety, with low mood. A miscarriage can, lead to other mental health challenges as well. And so I think that, an obstetrician should know enough about basic mental health to not be saying things like that. But yeah, unfortunately, there are those messages out there of just get on with it, just treat it like a period, and I really disagree with those messages. So, anyone who's listening to this who has gone through any kind of loss, whether it is miscarriage or some other kind of loss, or you just feel like you're grieving or you've lost your mojo, just remember that no one has the right to tell you to get over something before you feel ready. You're the one who will know when you're ready. And, when we try to skip through our emotions and pretend they're not there and pretend that things didn't happen, that can be really damaging. So, that's my lesson from all of this. And the other lesson I would say is that I think it's really tricky with pregnancy. You get told not to tell people too early. But I also don't agree with that anymore, because for a few reasons, I hadn't told a lot of people about the pregnancy. And so the miscarriage felt really lonely. I felt really isolated, and I didn't know how to bring it up with people, because if I hadn't told them I was pregnant, how do I tell them that I just had a miscarriage? So it's there's no right or wrong with that, but I think it's just something that we need to think about as women in society a little bit more. We all have our own personal choice to make around whether we share or don't share a pregnancy. But if you feel like it's going to be more supportive to have support if you have had a loss, then I encourage you to be open about it as well, because I think that's something that I could have supported myself a little bit better with. But yeah, that's it for today's episode. Obviously, this is a topic that can feel really tender. so if you've listened to this and if you've resonated with it, if you have had a pregnancy loss or any kind of grief recently, I hope this is supportive for you. I wanted to do this episode before Christmas because I think, navigating grief around Christmas time can be really challenging as well. So that's it for today, I think. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to send me an email. I'm happy to do a follow-up episode if anything comes up. This was really me just riffing from the heart, remembering my experience almost a year later. Just permission to grieve, to do it in your own time. Like, it's taken me almost a year to share this loss with my community. I know other women that share straight away, and there's no right or wrong. It's just that we're all so different and we all have different ways to manage being CEOs, to manage being on social media and sharing certain parts of our lives. And I guess this is a way that I've chosen to manage this experience for me, but there is no right or wrong. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. I know it's probably got a really different energy to my usual episodes, but I wanted to share this with you. If you have enjoyed this episode or if you have found this supportive, then I'd be so grateful if you could share a 5-star review. Happy to chat to anyone who has any questions. Have a beautiful week, and I will see you next week for, I think what we have coming up next is possibly an interview with my husband, Nick, who some of you know from social media, or permission to start experiencing more joy and rest. I haven't actually decided what's coming up next week yet, but it will be something really fun. I will speak to you all next week. Bye, beauties.